issues, particularly environmental degradation. The 2019 World Culture Forum also highlighted to bring people back in for the policy making in culture. This effort should promote inclusive mechanisms in empowering people working in the arts, culture, and environmental sectors and encourage cooperation among environmental and culture stakeholders in eco-friendly rural and urban linkages and revitalization. In this decade of action, collaboration, and cooperation among stakeholders is crucial for achieving 2030. uh, how art and design can stimulate new ideas to address the global environmental emergency. A very timely call. Climate change encourages the multi-stakeholder partnerships to develop and generate ideas from arts and cultural expressions to strengthen our collective action for climate mitigation and adaptation. Thank you.
Etienne Turbin is a philosopher based in Berlin, Germany. He has worked extensively and internationally as a researcher and creator on the issue of climate change. Among the many projects, he has been one of the principal investigators of international exhibition Reassembling the Natural and co-editor of the book Art in the Anthropocene. He's going to help us introduce and frame our question in this presentation, or not being normal, or the whole Anthropocene. The stage is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, and great to be with you all in this odd but exciting assembly to be with you. I also just received the positive environmental news that the 45th President of the United States has left the White House for the final time. So I hope everyone out there felt a breathe a sigh of relief as that occurred as we get started here today. So I'm going to discuss the Anthropocene. You can hear me fine, yes?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just getting these notifications from the admin. So I'm, as was mentioned in the introduction, part of my work in the last decade was trying to bring the environmental crisis into conversation by way of several publications through the Open Humanities Press, an open access publishing platform, including Architecture and Art in the Anthropocene. Both of these are available through Open Humanities as open access publications. I'll let you have a look at them. I've also worked with K Verlag, a publishing atelier here in Germany, to produce the series Intercalations, which is
Hello? Etienne, are you still there? Something happened to Etienne's connection. Okay, let's try to move on to the next presentation, and then when we will verify that Etienne is back, then he can have continue his presentation. So let's, as I mentioned earlier, this webinar is part of a larger project which is called Weather 2020. So let's see a video that explains to us about the Weather project.
To me, Weather is a project that started from a small community that went wide, you know, and that had big dreams.
È un progetto che racchiude al suo interno tantissime sfaccettature, dalla formazione al lato artistico, all'ambiente.
Weather è un'opera musicale che è presentata in una forma completamente diversa, che ha preso le sembianze del tempo in cui stiamo vivendo.
Weather is a multimedia art project, combines performing arts, design, music, theater, and environmental awareness and education.
Weather credo che sia un'esperienza, quindi un viaggio fatto di musica, immagini, arte, espressioni, suoni, visioni.
È venuta fuori una forma musicale completamente nuova, cioè una sorta di nuova via di presentare un concept album.
Spero che sia un'esperienza diversa per ciascuno e che racconti qualcosa, che dica qualcosa di profondo e che resti.
Weather is an opera which is composed by Elizabeth Swalos, one of the important directors and composer from the United States. She created this special work in collaboration with a group of young artists from Spoleto, Italy, with the intention of dedicating music work to the weather and to the climate change.
Liz always tried to take special problems and try to be creative in engaging those issues in a way that was beautiful as well as educational. But the harmonies of weather, I think she spoke to this, and the dissonance of weather, whether it be water and thunderstorms or hurricanes or tornadoes, for her as a musician and as the composer, she heard those sounds in a way that perhaps I would not hear them, in that she heard the music in each of those sounds.
È partito nel 2014 e poi ha avuto il suo debutto al Teatro Romano durante il Festival dei Due Mondi, però non si è mai spento, cioè è sempre stato un fuoco.
Questa partitura è stata sempre nel cassetto qua su e chiamava sempre, c'era sempre questo richiamo a rimettere le mani su questo tema e su queste musiche. E poi gli astri hanno voluto che si allineassero tutti insieme e siamo riusciti a riprodurla in questa nuova forma.
It's sort of an exploration of a new form of us understanding how can we bring this project to even a wider audience than the 2,000 people that were able to gather in Teatro Romano. I mean, that's exciting. That's something that this pandemic is showing, is as much as this online platform can be dangerous and can feel as though they're isolating people, it also is showing us how we can come together.
So we decided that we needed something that could be more accessible and sort of more of a hook, basically trying to speak the language of the place where you're bringing it, right? Like if you're going to use the medium of the internet to deliver this thing, then maybe the right answer is to go further into that world and try to adapt to that language. And part of adapting to that language is to give it in a container that works for that space. And that space became this idea of a VR environment.
We investigated many different possibilities, but one of the things that we wanted to have happen, and we thought that was important, was that this piece was able to bring people together, and that people were able to have spontaneous interactions and conversations, and that's something that is missing in our life as we are experiencing this issue of the pandemic, the global pandemic.
So we are basically designing the online platform, the 360 platform, where audience can enter and navigate through the works of the opera, where they will be able to discover the songs, the animations, the videos, as well as the information and educational content that can help audience get more connected to the content of the opera itself.
Our focus has been primarily on finding creative technologists that can help us create that space that would allow the audience to have the potential for interactivity and interaction.
In this project, the idea was to also bring together artists from different parts of the world, different voices, different sounds, different styles, all converging towards the same message.
Noi siamo partiti da quest'idea di pensare a un'esperienza locale e renderla globale. L'hashtag infatti da cui siamo partiti è Think Local and Make It Global. Ed è stato proprio questo il percorso. Siamo partiti da qua con le prove con il nostro coro, con i nostri straordinari ragazzi del coro dell'Associazione Bisse, e poi abbiamo cominciato a contattare i vari artisti nelle varie parti del mondo, artisti che sono nostri amici e che hanno collaborato con noi nel corso degli anni.
I brought some my own instrument, which is very unique, the percussion, in Korean traditional percussion. So I mixed with my own drum. So I play on that.
E piano piano questa rete si è allargata e questo ha reso possibile anche di rendere anche il suono dell'opera più globale. Abbiamo inserito strumenti dalle varie parti del mondo, c'è il Kayageum coreano, c'è lo shakuhachi giapponese, c'è tutti strumenti che abbiamo preso in giro e che siamo riusciti a inserirli dentro un contesto musicale che è diventato appunto un caleidoscopio, è un suono che nasce da qua, locale, scritto con le parole scritte da uno spoletino, da un ragazzo spoletino bravissimo, talentuoso, che è Filippo Gonzalez, e queste parole, questi suoni li abbiamo contaminati con vari linguaggi, perché si canta in spagnolo, si canta in arabo, si canta in francese, in inglese, in italiano, in serbo.
The Korean percussion, there's the meaning, each one of the instruments. And we have like a small gong, is they call like a thunder sounds of the thunder, and like a big gong is like sounds like raining, and like a small like a drum is called jangu. We call like windy. So it's very fit with the like weather project.
C'è bisogno di contaminazioni. Se un progetto deve essere con un grosso respiro, più partecipazione c'è e più è, fra virgolette, bella la riuscita.
Il Comune di Spoleto ha fortemente voluto Weather perché è un'opera multimediale musicale che riesce a promuovere e divulgare al meglio i temi della sostenibilità ambientale.
Quest'anno si è deciso, insieme al partner capofila, che è il Comune di Spoleto, di realizzare un evento che comprendesse, intorno a Weather come opera, comprendesse anche attività di convegni, attività per le scuole, di divulgazione ambientale.
In qualità di assessore all'ambiente mi auguro che il messaggio di Weather, nato a Spoleto con la collaborazione e la partecipazione anche di associazioni internazionali, possa raggiungere il cuore di tantissime persone anche al di fuori della nostra realtà.
Per noi è motivo di grande orgoglio il fatto che un evento come Weather Spoleto 2020, che tratta di temi ambientali, abbia ricevuto una certificazione di sostenibilità ambientale per la produzione e la realizzazione dell'evento. Speriamo che questo progetto diventi un progetto pilota e sia seguito anche da altri che hanno la nostra stessa sensibilità.
The ultimate goal for Weather, even after January 30th, is to be able to create a room where you can imagine you can connect a classroom to someone working in the field and be able to have that interaction and that conversation.
Art is a really safe place to do that. It's a place where you can broaden awareness on an emotional level.
But Liz's music always lives on. And we have found that to be true, and it may not live on in the political statements that it's making, but it lives on in the harmonies and the music that people want to hear.
Io credo che mai come oggi occorra riflettere sui temi ambientali, perché è una riflessione sull'uomo, e quindi mai come ora ci dobbiamo interrogare su chi siamo, cioè, o meglio ricordarci chi siamo veramente e ritornare alla parte più vera di noi stessi. E secondo me quest'opera, il suo vero obiettivo secondo me deve essere questo, cioè riportarci a casa.
Listen to the beat of the world.
Yes, so save the date. January 3rd is the inauguration of the online opera, but this will remain accessible also later on, and people can watch it both individually and in groups. So now we have Etienne again back. There was a problem, technical problem with his connection. So now he's back, and let's please continue your presentation.
Thank you. Sorry for these technical glitch, but happy to be back with you, and that was lovely to see the video. So with respect to the environmental crisis, the climate crisis, and the ongoing challenges about ecology in our contemporary lives, we developed this project called Reassembling the Natural, which is a series of interventions into natural history museums that call into question how the Natural History Museum itself is an image of nature, and what is the problem with that specific image of nature. Many of you are familiar with a kind of contemporary natural history museum inherited from the 19th century. We have done work and correspondence with folks all over the world, reporting back and sharing information about the design and model of their own natural history museum. This, of course, being a well-known one, the British Natural History Museum. And one of the big issues that we try to address in this is that regardless of the presentation of the concern about climate change or biodiversity loss, there is one persistent pathology within the Natural History Museum. And working with dozens of artists over the period of the last 7 years, we have done interventions that try to open up that pathology. If we really want to understand the history of the Anthropocene and the inheritance that we get, these three texts are quite consequential. The first, from the German neurologist and psychologist Kurt Goldstein, which was written in 1934 while he was in exile in the Netherlands, examines the organism. And Goldstein's key idea that I want to share with you from this was to borrow from Gestalt psychology the idea of a figure-ground relationship with respect to the organism. And this is very important because today we hear many, many things in many different places, not just the Natural History Museum, that humanity or the human actors or agents are going through a figure ground inversion. That the background assumption, the climate, the weather, the natural world is no longer just the ground against which the human figure acts, but it itself in this inversion is now coming to act on us. Now, while that does offer an important understanding of the current processes, it's also a very severe limit. Similarly, the French philosopher and physician Georges Canguilhem, in his book, The Normal and the Pathological, tries to develop a theory of the organism that is not about its technical or mechanical fitness or its activities, but about its relationship to its milieu, or what we would call today its habitat. And while this idea of the organism as a relational entity connected to its habitat or its ecology is of vital importance, again, this idea that there is an organism whose outside is the milieu or the environment is again a limiting feature of how we can understand our current situation in the Anthropocene. And so one of the key thinkers that I would encourage you all to explore and discover is the American evolutionary biologist, Lynn Margulis. And one of her key books, Symbiotic Planet, A New Look at Evolution from 1998, offers a much different proposal that, first of all, the organism cannot be understood as an adversary or antagonist to its environment, because the organism itself is an environment. All of us who are stuck wherever we are as a result of the pandemic have become tremendously aware of this fact if we have had the swab to determine if we are suffering from COVID-19. We are an environment for the virus. And so why is this so important that we eliminate the idea that the human being or human beings as a species, as a set of organisms, are in an adversarial relationship to the environment. And so we're causing climate change and we have to respond to that by fighting against this environment, by reimagining the nested or symbiotic relationship that we have to the natural world. The term that Lynn Margulis gives for this is holobiont, or the whole biont, right? So the whole organism is itself a composition of other subsystems and other organisms, which we have this the whole way up and down. Now, to illustrate why this is so important and why we really need to think about this, I'm going to give you two examples, both very briefly. The first one is from the world of animals and is a scientific example. The second one, from the world of plants, is a personal example. So the first example is a story about these incredible, amazing creatures, saga antelopes, which live on the plains in Kazakhstan. And in 2016, it was discovered that hundreds of thousands of these antelopes had all died at roughly the same period within 8 hours of one another. And so over the course of several years, hundreds of scientists participated in the research that tried to determine the cause of death of the saga. Now, immediately they could rule out the fact that this was not a pathogen that was passed from one to another because of the simultaneity of death. It was as if someone had flicked a switch and they all instantly died for kilometers. And so after a number of autopsies, a whole series of different research agendas and a compilation of all of this research, the final publication was put forward. And what was identified as the cause of death was a bacterial infection that caused blood poisoning. in all of these antelopes at the same time. What in fact had occurred is that a bacteria that lives in the throat and the nose of these creatures, that's a completely regular, normal, nested element within its holobiont, as a result of changing temperatures when the animals are grazing, the normal differential between the outside temperature and the inside temperature went out of whack. And as a result of this, the bacterial population exploded to such a degree that it entered into the bloodstream of these beautiful animals and killed them in their hundreds of thousands. Now, this is a very sad story, but what's absolutely critical to understand is that climate change is not coming at us as if it's an environment hostile to us from the outside. In fact, it's something that is very much involved in the thresholds and gradients by which all of the systems which inhabit us are held in check as well. That should be startling. It should give us a good sense to pay attention to these questions, but it also reminds us that we are not standing as an agent against this natural world. We are embedded in as part of it 100%. Now, the second story I relay, I said would be a personal one about plants. While I was completing my doctoral research at the University of Toronto, I was quite stressed, and many of you who have done your doctorate or your graduate degrees will understand there's an incredible degree of stress at the end of this. And my habit to deal with that stress was to go out into a park, ride my bicycle to a park and spend a half hour amidst a group of willow trees, just breathing really deeply. And I would always feel incredibly relieved and return home and write up my dissertation with an incredible speed and focus. And after about 6 months of this habit of going to meet with these willow trees and spend some time in this park, I heard the neurophysicist and botanist Diana Beresford Kroger give an interview on the radio. And Diana says to the listeners and the interviewer that while the weeping willow appears in many cultures in sad songs and a variety of different artistic and cultural, both folk song, contemporary song, what have you, the weeping willow is not thus referred because it looks like it's crying. That's in fact a silly reference. The reason that we associate sadness with the willow tree is because it produces a very particular aerosol, as all trees produce various aerosols. And that aerosol mixes with our saliva so that when we eat, it augments our digestion and increases our serotonin production as part of our metabolic process, which is to say that weeping willows are ambient antidepressants. By breathing them in, we literally imbibe their aerosols and thereby increase our possibility for experiencing joy. What Diana Beresford Kroger's work reminds us is that we are all part of a living, breathing exchange. And the COVID-19 pandemic has reminded us in the most severe way that shared respiratory space is one that we have to pay attention to. It can't be taken for granted. And so to conclude, I want to refer to a very beautiful text from the philosopher Achille Mbembe called The Universal Right to Breathe. This is published online from Critical Inquiry. You can find it there. But Mbembe makes the point about the pandemic in a very particular way. And I quote him, "Since it, the pandemic, was imposed on us, the cessation of our activity derives not from our will. In many respects, it is simultaneously unforeseen and unpredictable. Yet what we need is a voluntary cessation, a conscious and fully consensual interruption, without which there will be no tomorrow. This idea that we would need to want to slow down, to want to pay attention to our shared respiration, to want to care about one another and how we take care of each other, requires a completely different image of nature. And I ask of you, when you think of the Anthropocene as an anthropathology, as an imagination that the human could ever stand alone, that you are reminded also of the idea developed by the brilliant writer Fred Moten in reference to the work of Edouard Glissant in the Poetic Intentions, that to imagine a new Anthropocene is to reimagine an image of nature adequate to the environmental crises of biodiversity loss and climate change. And in order to achieve such an imagination, we would have to consent not to be a single being. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Etienne, for this insightful presentation. We will have the chance to hear more from you at the end of the seminar. One of the biggest challenges of the fashion industry is the mountain of waste growing worldwide. Talking to us about this issue is Gwen Cunningham from Dublin, Ireland. She's the director of the Circle Economies Textile Program and coordinator of sustainability program at the Amsterdam Fashion Institute. Waste is a failed relationship, the potential of a circular fashion industry. Welcome, Gwen.
Hi, thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me okay. It's
Yes.
an absolute pleasure to be part today and to get to speak to you. So today I'm going to share my story, I suppose, on how I came to understand the critical role that designers play in reimagining our role on this planet and how we operate on this planet. And to start us off, you see an image here of a building, and I just want to kind of tell a little bit of my journey. So I trained as a fashion designer in Ireland, in Dublin, and throughout my education, I was primarily taught to think about my role to produce beautiful products, to produce desirable products. That was very firmly ingrained from the outset and still is globally in many fashion institutes. In my final year, I moved to the Netherlands to start working with an avant-garde designer over there, Marga Vijmans. And every day when I would arrive on my bike to the studio, I was confronted with this huge neon sign on the front of her building that read the sentence you see here, "Van alles is weer waardeloos," which translates to "everything is worthless again." Not the kind of sentence you want to see on your way to work every day, perhaps, but this is what I was confronted with every day. Now, I didn't think much of it at the time, and it wasn't until I went back to Ireland to finish my degree, to do my final collection and my dissertation, that this sentence kept coming back and kind of ringing in my ears. Everything is worthless again. I started to think about the value, the worth of my clothing, and where the items that I produce go after the point of sale. What happens when I say goodbye to them? And I drew on the back of an envelope at the time this sketch trying to kind of capture what I thought of this life cycle, you know, the way that we move from design to production, to sale, to use, to eventual end of life or death of an item of clothing. And I realized that essentially I was designing for landfill. And I started to question, you know, how can I, as a designer, how could I design items to ensure that they never reach that end of life, that death stage of the life cycle process? And I was reading a lot at the time to kind of wrap my head around this topic and came by the wonderful Jonathan Chapman, who writes that waste is nothing more than a failed relationship. And this gave me hope all of a sudden. When I read this, I thought, okay, if that is the case, if waste is nothing more than a failed relationship between product and consumer and user, then surely we can kind of redesign the conditions of that relationship and design waste out of the system entirely. But that led me to kind of question what exactly are the reasons that we break up with our product, that we say goodbye. One of the reasons that I came by in my research was, of course, this idea of planned obsolescence. And I could track this back as far as kind of 1932, around about the time, 1929, the stock markets in America collapsed. And there was a big effort being made to reboot the economy to get consumers to start buying products again. And a very clever guy, Bernard London, an Russian-American real estate broker, suggested the idea of planned obsolescence. He said, what if every item that we produce comes with an expiration date? And when that date comes along, the item will be legally dead and the government will confiscate the product and take it back from the consumer, forcing them to buy a new product. Now, thankfully, that didn't happen in the way that he had imagined it, at least. But you do see that this idea of planned obsolescence starts to come back around 50 years later, not driven and operated by governments necessarily, but really by businesses themselves. So for instance, a famous example of DuPont, who produce nylon, made a pair of stockings that was pretty much invincible. This was a fiber that could not break. You see a man here pulling a car with a pair of nylon stockings. Gave it to their employees to test. Everyone said, this is the best product we've ever seen. And then, of course, they started to realize, well, if we produce this product, we put it into the market, then we will only sell one pair of nylons per person. We will never sell a second pair. Let's go back to the drawing board. Let's produce a weaker fiber. Or so the story goes. And we see that this is still a reality today. So it's not something that has changed necessarily, even though we are becoming more technologically advanced. Many of the products that we produce are becoming less and less durable over time, as you see here in the graph. Now, the second thing that complements planned obsolescence is the idea of perceived obsolescence. And this is much more of a psychological trick. This is the voice in the back of your head when you go to leave the house that maybe asks, are you really going to wear that? Did you not wear that yesterday or 2 weeks ago? So this is the voice that basically teaches us to fall out of love with our products, even though they may still be functional, that we don't see them as desirable anymore. And a great story to illustrate this is from the wonderful writer Denis Diderot, French writer. He wrote a great article called Regrets on Parting with My Old Dressing Gown. And in it, he tells the story of the fact that he was gifted a red silk dressing gown by a friend, and he got rid of his old dressing gown. Then he's walking around his apartment in his red silk dressing gown, feeling very fine. And he looks at his curtains and he says, they don't really go with my new style. I better get some new curtains. Get some new curtains. Then he looks at his couch, the same question again. They don't really suit my new vibe. I better get a new couch. And so systematically, item by item, he starts to swap out everything in his life until he turns to his wife one day and he says, she doesn't really go with my new style. And he leaves his wife. What he says in this piece is that he was the absolute master of his old robe, and he is a slave to his new one. And this is often used by kind of consumer experts and psychologists to describe how normal levels of consumption, because of perceived obsolescence, kind of tip into a hyper consumption. Now, both of these things together, I often think of as kind of a quite dangerous cocktail that gets us very drunk on stuff, these two phenomena. And we see that that really started to take effect in the 1950s. This is the cover of Life magazine in 1955. And you see that it is a pure celebration of stuff. The title of the publication was Throwaway Living. And it is really signaling a key shift that was happening around that time, where we saw growth not to necessarily meet any real demand, but growth for growth's sake. And in that same year, Victor Lebow said, our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of good into ritual, that we seek our spiritual satisfaction, our ego satisfaction in consumption. We need things burned up, replaced, discarded at an ever accelerating rate. Consume, burn up, replace, discard. That is essentially Victor Lebow describing what we now call the linear economy. The fact that we have an industrial system that has been there for over 100 years, which is taking huge amounts of resources to make huge amounts of product, which are used for a day, a month, a year, and eventually being disposed of. Now, the fashion industry is, in my eyes at least, the perfect poster child for the linear economy. We extract or produce 90 million tons of fiber per year. We make over 100 billion items of new garment every year, and around 70 to 85% of everything we produce ends up going directly to landfill or incineration. Only 1% of textiles is being recycled back into new textiles. And of course, we know that we're in an age of hyperconsumption. This is accelerating for the fashion industry, especially due to the advent of fast fashion. So between 2000 and 2014, garment production doubled. The annual consumer started buying 60% more and also keeping their items for half as long as they used to. So more being produced, more being consumed, and quicker to waste. And we don't need huge graphs or explanations anymore, I think, to understand that this linear system, this linear way of working is really causing havoc, and it's pushing us up against kind of the limits of our growth. We are in a type of ecological overshoot at the moment and seeing the results of that firsthand in our newspapers every day. We know that, for instance, if we are to continue the way we go, and if regions such as China and India start to consume the way that we in the West consume, we would need 3 to 5 Earths to sustain us. But we have one, too bad. So what do we do within those limits? And this is really where my research, my work led me to the idea of the circular economy as an alternative way to kind of design our system, our way of operating on the planet, so that we are making sure all the materials and the products that we produce are used to their fullest potential and being continually brought back into the system, therefore displacing our dependence on raw resources and also eliminating the waste at end of use. We are 9.1% circular at the moment, according to our calculations. So we have a huge circularity gap. And this is really the work or the mission, I suppose, that I have personally, is to build a circular apparel industry specifically and build a zero waste textiles industry. And this is work that gets channeled through everything that we do at Amphi as an institution that's training the next generation of fashion professionals, but also through the work that I do at Circle Economy, where we're working directly with collectors, sorters, recyclers, brands, etc. And there's really 2 ways to tackle that challenge, in my mind at least. If you want to achieve a zero waste industry, you have to think about reducing the existing waste mountain. We have huge amounts of waste in the system that we need to recover. So that's around building technologies that can, for instance, recycle those materials, reuse those materials, repair those materials. And on the other hand, proactively building products and business models that make sure no waste is produced in the first instance. So there you can think of things like rental systems, or you can think of things like biodegradable products or recyclable products, or maybe products designed to last for 300 years. And I see a clear role for designers in both of those areas. So I still identify as a designer, even though I have not made a product in many, many years. Today, I'm mostly working in kind of the field of system design. And in order to create solutions, you need to understand the problem in all of its complexity. And this is why we often within Amphi take designers into the field and really expose them to the reality of that end of life or waste phase. In the words of our librarian at Amphi, the designer needs to marry the garbage man. The designer needs to understand the reality of that end of life phase so that they can do things differently. So we have, for instance, in the past number of years, brought all of our students, our design students, to waste collection facilities. And really, this radical step is to try and expose them to where their products will eventually go and give them a different type of education. Here you can see they are collecting data on a piece-by-piece basis of all of these used waste textile garments. So for instance, in that year, the Amphi students sorted through over 5,000 individual items, and they were building, as they went, they were building the world's first textile waste database, documenting kind of the categorization of waste. What fiber do we find? What quality do we find? What type of brands do we find? And all of this starts to feed kind of intelligence that we can use to make improvements in the system. So for instance, one of the quantitative findings from all of that research was that the percentage of waste within a collector's facility that is non-rewearable, that cannot be reused as a garment, is over 50%. And this is growing year on year because of fast fashion. The quality of our clothing is generally going lower, and this percentage of non-rewearable or recyclable textiles gets higher and higher. But you also see qualitative insights. These are often the kind of aha moments that a student might have. For instance, this was a label that we found while sorting that says at the very end, you can see a warning that fabric might stain linen and seating due to body temperature, but complaints for these reasons will not be accepted. So this is a pair of trousers that a brand has produced, knowing that if someone gets warm, sits down, the trousers will stain the seating. We are not designing products for end of life. We're not even designing products for use phase. And all of this goes towards the development of a technology which you will see here.
Europe and the US are throwing out more than 20 million tons of textiles every year, and the problem is growing. But so is the opportunity for change. These textiles are incredible resources to feed textile-to-textile recycling processes and create a circular industry. To reclaim these resources, textiles must be sorted by fiber composition, and the demand for recycled content must increase. That's where the FiberSort comes in. The FiberSort is a revolutionary textile sorting machine that is changing the game. It sorts finished textile products by fiber type, automatically creating precise recycling feedstocks, and finally providing a practical solution to return textiles to the supply chain. But we're not quite there yet. We need your help to optimize this technology and increase the demand for recycled textiles. Are you a collector, sorter, brand, or recycler? Then join the frontrunners in the textiles revolution and help make the FiberSort a reality. Go to fibersort.eu.
So this machine, which is the first of its kind in the world, was built off the back of the database that these Amphi students, together with Circular Economy, generated in the past few years. And of course, the other place where we use the data and the insights that we've collected is in really informing the curriculum that Amphi has. So off the back of this live research on the ground, we develop a set of circular design principles like the ones you see here: design aid waste, design for durability, design for cyclability, that are then embedded into the curriculum and start to really shape the type of designers that will then populate the industry, of course, once they graduate. So maybe just in summary, you know, the designer plays a critical role in not only producing beautiful and functional products, of course, that is always a part, but rather in ensuring also that the products and the technologies and the systems that we do design and produce enable not everything to be worthless again, but enable everything to be valuable again. And they are really the gatekeepers of that possibility. So thank you very much.
Thank you. In the northern city of Turin in Italy, there is a museum that has distinguished itself for a programming that is particularly active in the promotion of sustainable and natural approach. This is the National Museum of the Mountain. And so let's hear this presentation from the curator, Andrea Lerda. He's an art historian and founder of the online project platform Green.
Allora, buongiorno a tutti, io sono Andrea Lerda, sono il fondatore della piattaforma online Platform Green e curatore al Museo Nazionale della Montagna di Torino. Siamo qui per parlare di un tema di grande urgenza collettiva, la credenza di una presunta supremazia della specie umana sulle altre specie viventi e non viventi, cresciuta a dismisura nel corso degli ultimi anni, ha generato dinamiche economiche e politiche, culturali che sappiamo hanno avuto un impatto indelebile e incalcolabile sul mondo che coabitiamo. Oggi l'umanità è ad un bivio storico e può scegliere di non vedere, di restare nella grande cecità di cui scrive Amitav Ghosh, oppure può decidere di allearsi con la natura, accogliendo nuovi modi di intendere e progettare la propria presenza sulla Terra. Questo significa trasformare un problema in un'opportunità, ma al tempo stesso richiede il cambio radicale di un paradigma antropocentrico in uno biocentrico. Una serie di attori stanno operando questa trasformazione all'interno di ambiti differenti, dall'editoria alla ricerca, dalla scienza alla filosofia alle politiche comunitarie. Ovviamente questo non è sufficiente ed è necessario trasferire questa rivoluzione all'interno di ogni ambito della politica, dell'economia e della comunicazione, ma soprattutto è necessario operare una trasformazione radicale nella veicolazione di pensieri, di informazioni, di concetti. Ogni ambito dell'educazione, della creatività e della trasmissione di saperi diventa quindi oggi di importanza cruciale. Dobbiamo modificare l'immaginario individuale e quello collettivo, proponendo nuove narrazioni che ci accompagnino oltre l'immaginario antropocentrico. In questo caso, in questo processo, in questo senso, l'arte, la creatività contemporanea ha un ruolo di grande rilevanza, non è sufficientemente riconosciuto. La creatività contemporanea, che è l'ambito nel quale io porto avanti la mia pratica curatoriale, focalizzata sull'utilizzo dell'arte come attivatore e veicolatore di un nuovo pensiero ecologico, è uno strumento utile per esercitare l'immaginario, come afferma l'antropologo italiano Matteo Meschiari, e per pensare, per reimmaginare, per essere creativi, come scrive invece Donna Haraway. Per questa ragione, nel 2014 ho fondato il progetto online Platform Green, perché l'arte è uno strumento molto potente che ha la capacità e il potere di influire in maniera costruttiva all'interno dell'immaginario collettivo e di apportare delle esperienze curative, trasformative all'interno, ripeto, dell'immaginario collettivo. La piattaforma Platform Green è un contenitore all'interno del quale la ricerca di artisti contemporanei che operano all'interno del rapporto tra arte e natura dà appunto spazio alle loro ricerche. Un'esperienza che poi personalmente mi ha permesso di diventare curatore al Museo Nazionale della Montagna di Torino, dove dal 2018 operiamo in ambito sostenibilità con un programma specifico di mostre. L'arte contemporanea, assieme alla scienza, viene spesso utilizzata per proporre dei messaggi, dei contenuti che effettivamente propongano delle soluzioni di cambiamento. Le azioni che l'arte contemporanea, la creatività, assieme alle istituzioni culturali possono avere per agire in un'ottica di sostenibilità e di creazione di immaginari sono numerose. La prima azione è quella di creare una serie di progetti espositivi tematici e di public program e di percorsi educativi che interagiscano con la comunità e vadano a tentare di proporre visioni nuove e di dialogare con la comunità in maniera anche innovativa. È ad esempio il caso questo della mostra post-water che ho proposto al Museo Montagna di Torino. In quel caso ho deciso di lavorare assieme ad un artista che si chiama Marinella Senatore. Marinella Senatore ha realizzato questa performance all'interno dello spazio pubblico, siamo nella città di Torino, in Italia. In quel caso l'artista ha realizzato questa vera e propria parata, in questa occasione ha raccolto una serie di performer, di ballerini, di musicisti, di cantanti, di attori, di sportivi, tutta una serie di soggetti che hanno attivato emotivamente, hanno fatto una sorta di massaggio cardiaco al pubblico che osservava e che guardava la performance per sollevare evidentemente una riflessione nell'ambito della sostenibilità. In questo caso parlavamo di acqua, parlavamo di risorse idriche, di carenza di risorse idriche per effetto del global warming. Questo è un esempio, uno tra gli esempi a mio avviso più evidenti di come il dialogo tra l'arte contemporanea e la collettività possa operare un cambiamento che passa attraverso un impatto emotivo molto forte con le persone. Un'altra azione che ritengo molto importante per fare sì che l'arte possa essere uno strumento per apportare dei cambiamenti è quello di cercare di dialogare con degli enti territoriali, delle realtà che a livello territoriale operano a sostegno di iniziative e di azioni di cambiamento. Rilevante in questo senso è la collaborazione che il Museo Montagna di Torino ha effettuato con la Fondazione CRC di Cuneo, che nel territorio montano della Valle Grana in Piemonte ha sostenuto la realizzazione di un progetto che si chiama Acqua Viva, che consiste nella realizzazione di 2 invasi ad uso irriguo e turistico per fare fronte alla carenza idrica in un territorio montano. Nell'ambito di questo progetto per il Museo Montagna ho presentato appunto questa mostra Underwater e in questo caso le opere degli artisti contemporanei hanno dialogato con una serie di contributi di ricercatori per parlare di strategie green e grey in ambito idrico. Questo mi lega appunto alla terza azione, è il dialogo tra l'arte e la scienza, un dialogo sempre più importante per creare delle sinergie. Molti artisti infatti lavorano in stretto dialogo con i ricercatori, producono le loro opere a seguito del dialogo con la ricerca. Questo è il caso della mostra Underwater, nel quale il Dipartimento di Ingegneria dell'Ambiente del Politecnico di Torino ha curato dei veri e propri corner scientifici in mostra. E ribadisco l'importanza di questo dialogo tra l'arte e la scienza, un dialogo che è emerso di recente anche in un'altra mostra alle Muse di Trento, che introduce una quarta azione strategica, che è quella del dialogo tra realtà museali, con cui sviluppare dei progetti condivisi, con cui ampliare la diffusione di visioni in materia di sostenibilità. Un ultimo punto fondamentale nella possibilità della creatività di apportare un cambiamento all'interno non solo dell'immaginario ma anche delle pratiche, è proprio quello di cercare di operare a livello strutturale sul piano pratico e quindi di adottare delle soluzioni di allestimento, soluzioni di utilizzo di materiali riciclabili, sostenibili ed ecocompatibili per la realizzazione e la produzione delle mostre delle opere d'arte. Cito in questo caso la collaborazione, nel caso appunto del Museo Montagna, con l'azienda Coex per la realizzazione di tendaggi in fibra naturale e 100% biodegradabili, oppure la realizzazione del catalogo TreeTime con Econil, prodotto da materiali riciclati che utilizzeremo per realizzare una pavimentazione al museo. il prossimo anno, nel 2021 e anche nel 2022, personalmente come curatore e anche come Museo Montagna, si lavorerà molto sul concetto di empatia, sul concetto di ecofilia che la ricercatrice cinese Ung Ruyu ha teorizzato attraverso anche un secondo termine, quello dell'ecopedagogia, cioè dobbiamo utilizzare anche la creatività contemporanea per educare e per sviluppare un nuovo senso di ecofilia, di empatia con la natura, attraverso delle strategie di educazione nella natura, con la natura e sulla natura, distaccandoci da un approccio educativo che nel corso dei decenni ha invece sostenuto una netta separazione tra l'aspetto educativo e la relazione con la natura.
How art and design thinking generate bottom-up initiatives? How do art and design encourage collective awareness on sustainability? Vinita Larasati from Bandung, Indonesia. She is a lecturer at Bandung Institute of Technology, an activist at Bandung Creative City Forum. She will address these questions in her presentation, From Community Initiatives to Urban Solutions. Welcome, Vinita.
Hi, I'm very happy to be a part of this event. This is a really good sharing from everyone. My name is Dwinita Larasati, but I go by Tita. So I'm from Bandung. I studied industrial design at Institute of Technology Bandung, as you can see. But I'm also active in many communities. And here for this session, my focus is at cities and how actually cities is important, because city is a source of many problems, but it can also be a source of many solutions as well. And well, in order to know how your city behaves, you have to know what it's made of. And we have to make sure that the city is also actually containing a lot of potentials, and we have to be confident with it. In this case, this is a case of Bandung, where I've been living for the last years. Actually, after studying in ITB in Bandung, I continued my study at industrial design at Eindhoven Design Academy, and then after that, Delft University of Technology. So I spent about 10 years in the Netherlands. And when I returned, somehow in 2007, there's this momentum that all people about my age then, we wanted to make change in the city, because we didn't see that Bandung was managed to accommodate our needs. Because as you can see, Bandung is a relatively small city, although it's a capital of West Java, which is the most populated island province in Indonesia. But Bandung city contains 3 million people, and from these 3 million people, mostly are young people, and we have about 100 and something higher education institutions. And from those 100 something, we have about 14 universities with design or architecture, art or craft majors. That makes us Bandung full of artists or artists to be or designers to be, and so on and so on. But around the 2007, the earlier 2000, we didn't see that the city accommodates our needs. And the important thing is why city is because city is seen as an entity, administrative entity, that is most flexible and most agile and most resilient to face the future challenges, which comes in the form of either climate change or movement of massive human beings for any reasons, and now the pandemic. So of course, it was also, we heard this often as well, that in 2050, about 70% of people in the world will live in cities or in areas with city facilities and so on. That's why UNESCO Creative Cities Network was formed, because they thought that they saw that city can actually offer the potentials of creativity in order to answer the urban challenges. And so this is just a part of young people who are, we formed the Bandung Creative City Forum in 2008. And we decided that, okay, in order to change the city, we actually have to do it sometimes ourselves and not waiting for anyone else. Of course, we work together with many parties, but we see them as partners. And we, from what we know, we do our activities, which I call here community initiatives. And we are a form of people with different backgrounds. I myself am an industrial designer, but in this screen, you can see a lot of people with different backgrounds. There are photographers, IT people, even lawyers, merchants, entrepreneurs, and so on and so on. So we've been working since 2008 to make prototypes to show the government and to show local people how the city can actually work better through its facilities, through its systems, and so on. And since Bandung joined Bandung joined UNESCO Creative Cities Network in 2015 as a city of design, then we also comply to the commitment that we would use our creative potentials to answer to the sustainable development challenges. And 2021 is actually the best momentum this year because the UN has declared that 2021 is the year of creative economy for sustainable development. So this is a chance for us to show that design and creativity can actually answer to these challenges. And if we see that the 3 pillars of sustainability, planet, people, prosperity, and now there's peace and partnership, all projects that we did always always reflect to these 3 things. And we always see the city as an organic entity. It has also a center for thinking, center for breathing. It has also these lines to distribute your nutrition. It has also a history. So it's not unlike our human body. So we treated our city as an organic entity that also needs some parts to be healed, that also needs some spa, say. And then in 2020, so last year, Indonesia Creative Cities Network partnered with U20. Urban 20 is the group of mayors of G20 countries. So they were forming this policy recommendation, and ICCN is their partner as knowledge partner to write a white paper and policy recommendation on inclusive creative economy and the future of work. Well, this graphics is a part of that publication, but the main thing is that we argue that actually creative economy is the best sector that gives opportunity for inclusive work in the future towards the SDG 2030. And here we can see that if you want to have a human-centered development, you have to also consider the other partners, which is academics and research institutions, governments, business sector and financial institutions. And then we also have to care about the technology that we use in order to create works. And now that there's a disruption in the form of pandemic, of course, we have to do this iteration, like some parts will get better, and then some parts may be safe, but then somehow the virus also break again, mutated and so on. So we go back to the mitigating and surviving and so on. So this kind of iteration we have to face. And then we believe that arts, well, creativity, creative economy, creative industries actually is the sector to answer to that. So these 3 things, if community initiatives for sustainable urban solutions are to be faced, then there are 3 things that we can do actually. We can first prototype the future, and then we have to make use of the youth, technology, and in a way we have to make it fun. So it's like design thinking kind of fun. And then maintaining the synergy between all the stakeholders. So in this way, I'm going to give a bit of examples from Bandung. In prototyping the future, what we did was, for example, if we make interventions to public arts and city parks, we try to convince the government to do public arts, for example, but they didn't have the budget for that. They didn't even know that they could have budget for that and so on. So we just built what we can do. And then we show the government that actually the environment will be better by doing so. And then it turned out that by having examples, the government then could catch what we want. And then they built with the public money, they also raise fundings to build many things that we actually give examples to. Also the forest walk that we only have 1 city forest in Bandung, and there was a plan to build it into an apartment building, restaurant, and so on. But then a lot of communities protested. So we protest by building our small version of forest walk, which is a canopy walk actually. But then because it worked well, and then the government then built it with the public money in some years after. So you see, all these examples were taken over by the government and then made real because we built the prototype first. So it's like proving first what the city can do. So this is like 4 of the biggest project that we've been doing. And about youth, because Bandung is full of young people, almost 70% of its citizens are under 40 years old because Bandung is full of universities and schools. So young people come here to study and so on. And then we have this demographic bonus, but if we don't do anything about it, and now that education is altered to all going online and so on, while not everybody has the access to education through internet and so on. So it's getting more and more challenging to get equal access to education. But then we do these kind of activities using design thinking, using technology that they're really familiar with. So everybody, all young people now, almost everybody has a mobile phone in their hands. They all like to play games. They all want to be communicating in their own way and so on and so on. So we were building these apps, digital application. We were creating games and so on to get them interested to solve problem in the city their way. So Suburbia Young Explorers is to have young children, toddler and basic school age, to explore their own city. And then Satria is to make them find the solution through games, animation, or comics that they are creating to solve to make recommendation of solutions. Aksiku is for young eco leaders because they have to detect, this is for an app for high school students to detect the nearest problem of gray water, river, solid waste, and green open space. And the ones who has access to the geotagging of their finding is themselves, of course, the teacher, but then also the municipality. So the city knows what to dispatch to a certain area to cope with it. SASAP is a game of getting lost. So you get urban adventures. This is to get young people to gain empathy towards their city, because the city is not only made of their home and school and maybe malls and cafes, but also to these so-called slum areas, very dense urban kampungs and so on. So we do that by playing game, and they can gain their knowledge about their own city. Jalan Jajan is about repopularizing local joints and local businesses through a game. So people get to know about the city through the food culture and through the heritage of the culture and so on, because they were so because lots of chain of fast food and so on, they start getting buried, but now they get popular again. In the end, we have to maintain the synergy. So we know that we did this all together with the academia, which the A, B, C, G. A is for academia, B is a business sector, C is community, G and government, M is media, and F is financial institution. So wherever we do our project, we always try to involve all these hexahelix stakeholders within this step: connect, collaborate, and commercial celebrate. Connect is where we map who will get involved. Collaborate is the program that we do, actual activity, and commerce and celebrate is where we are ready to expose it to either in a festival or is there a transaction and so on. Design Action is actually the yearly design thinking workshop that we did every year with the government. So it's about 250 people, and at least 1/4 has to be from the municipality, because they have to hear in an active way, in an interactive way also. And it's very, design thinking is very equal, so there's no hierarchy there. So if you're a boss of somebody within the group, you don't act as it, but then everybody is knowledgeable here. And here the mayor is right away listening to the solutions and so on, so he could catch the best solution which he can implement in the near future. And lastly, to maintain the synergy, we really insist to have a bill on creative economy, because what is happening now is if a city leader know about creative economy and how to use creativity to develop the city and put it in a strategy, it's fine. But then the next successor, so the next mayor, if they don't understand about the importance of it, it's not included in the city strategy. So the consequences, all these activities go back to the communities and to the academics. And well, doing the bottom up initiative is always working well, but then it will get greater impact if you also involve the government from the top down. So we're glad that not long ago, 2021 in January, actually 11th of January, our bill for creative economy was passed. So now it's another challenge to really make it work. So by doing so, we hope that we can show that creativity can actually answer to the challenges in a bigger level. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vinita. It is often the case that the standards for the so-called green architecture or sustainable architecture and passive houses are actually too expensive to be sustainable, and thus only available in highly luxurious architectures and buildings. Namjin Park from Ansan, Korea, a professor of spatial design at the Seoul Institute of the Arts, introduces to us her research, Spatial Design for Sustainability, the biophilic design characteristics in Korean design.
Hi everyone, my name is Namjin Park from Seoul Institute of the Arts. The basic objective of sustainability are to reduce consumption of non, minimize waste, and create healthy, productive environments. Here is sustainable design effort in Korea. According to energy consumption standards for building type in Korea, both residential and non-residential should reduce cooling and heating energy by 60% reduction, which is passive house level in 2020. And in 2025, zero energy is mandatory. The table shows green energy and green architectures elements. For example, solar energy and other renewable energy and passive house. And passive house requires wall thickness 500 millimeter, which is very thick, including 300 millimeter insulation. Those kind of thing is going to be sustainable design effort in Korea right now. Although there are many positive outcomes, there are also several negatives. One of them is ignore the human desire to come into contact with nature. The other is a luxury sustainable design space. Some luxury commercial stores renovate old building to make their luxury flagship store. That turned out to be trend of a commercial area recently. That means too expensive to be sustainable. To reduce the environmental impact, often fail to meet the sustainable goal of design. So the question is that, is sustainable design sustainable? Now I agree that it is time to switch from environmentally friendly design to design that people truly love, namely life-friendly design. Biophilic design can make it possible. Biophilic design is combination of biophilia and design. The term biophilia combines bio, which means life, and philia means love or likes, by biologist Edward O. Wilson, 1984. The idea of biophilia is that human genes are engraved with the instinct of love for life. Biophilic design is social and environmental psychological design concept. People prefer a design space in which nature is introduced because the connection between humans and nature gives a sense of stability and optimal comfort. The purpose of biophilic design to overcome, separate from nature, and create a new perspective on architecture and space environment to increase a satisfying and valuable natural experience. The concept of a biophilic design has many consensus with Korean ancestors' wisdom. The idea that harmony with nature and respect for life that leads to health and abundance. How Korean ancestors presented the sustainable design. To investigate the characteristics of biophilic design in Korean space, I use Experimental Biophilic Design Characteristics by Stephen Kellett. Stephen Kellett is the author of Biophilic Design in 2005. This table will be the analysis tool, and the experimental biophilic design characteristics include direct experience of nature, indirect experience of nature, and place-based relationship experience. And as you see the table, direct experience of nature include the sunlight, air, water, plants, animal, view of weather, and views to be the element to express the direct experience of nature. Indirect experience of nature include image of nature, natural materials, natural colors, and place-based relationship experience is that prospect and refuge, organized complexity, and so on. Interestingly, biophilic design can be implemented not only through direct experience of nature, but also through indirect experience of nature and place-based relationship experience. In perspective, Kellett, experimental biophilic design characteristics in Korean space, the direct experience of nature appeared in the relationship inside and outside of the space. Second, indirect experience of nature appeared in shapes and forms of the space. Third, place-based relationship experience appeared in site planning as well as space planning. Close look, case 1. Yeongyongdang in Changdeok Place. Actually, this is a residential space built in 1846. As you can see, all around the Yeongyongdang space, you can see direct experience of nature, indirect experience of nature, as well as place-based relationship experience. Case 2 is Soshae-1, which is separate garden, built in 1557. As you can see in this map, which is in left side, this place is very unique. In Soshae-1, there's a very unique element, which is Ogongmun. Ogongmun is a unique gate that interconnects the outside and inside of the Soshae-1 in order to accommodate nature flow. And also, you can see Soshae-1 all around the area. You can see direct experience of nature, indirect experience, as well as place-based relationship experience. To figure out the unique Korean biophilic design elements for modern Korean spaces, I did a comparison study. Here is the outcome of comparison study: internalization of light versus objectification of light. In Korea, using the light, natural sunlight enters to the building, it brightens the living space, while in Western it is expressed as the visual object or visually pleasing object. Structural beauty versus formal beauty. In Korea, a structure of a building was made by wood material mainly, while in Western, objectively identifying and expressing the rules and order of the nature. Third, interpenetration versus separated dualization. In Korea, overlapping the penetration of space provide uncertainty between internal-external spaces, while in Western, fully separated interior and in conclusion, how art and design can stimulate new ideas to address the global environmental emergency. First suggestion, understand our need to meet nature so that design the space with the idea of contact with the nature directly and intellectually. Second suggestion, recover Korean design DNA to provide a place where the energy of nature and the human mind united into one. Third suggestion, redefine design. Here's the design in Chinese character. This idea is from Nagasawa Tadanori. He is a professor of Musashino University, Japan. He raised the need to redefine the concept of design. If you look at this design words in Chinese character, the design in Chinese character is two words. First character is a design, and second one is a picture. If you look at the first words, which means design intention, and this design intention in Chinese character combine sound and mind. That means listen to the sound of mind. So that if you redefine the design, hear the mind that humans are part of nature and solve the spatial problem that you face today, then the true, natural, friendly design will continue. Finally, it is truly sustainable design when human art spirit meets nature. Thank you.
Only through the harmonious relation with the environment, we can find solutions to help us assure a prosperous future for the next generations. Traditional wisdom has been pointing the way for centuries, and if we care to listen, we can find the knowledge and inspiration to guide us. Bringing the voice of the Northern Indigenous nation, we have with us from Banff, Canada, Renelta Arluk, Artistic Director of Indigenous Art at Banff Center for Art and Creativity.
Kilalukao kapta. Na ilokata. Nutakare inuek tu umiak paulakun kilalukao rogot. Chumina chung nakit kapang mapakublupak inuek pailiting tup kitaprani. Wagok kilaluwa kami. Tau chikun hawa hugruo nekotay mani. Kihimik tiwala nekot. Aganat ki hawakto nekot.
My name is Renelta Arluk, and I'm born in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories. I'm very familiar with the Dene side of me, but the Inuit side of me, I guess it never got explored as much.
We never used to let the woman in the hunting boat just because it's so dangerous.
We've been on a boat and they're hunting whales.
when I think about my ancestors, or I think about my family, and like I'm the first contemporary artist in my family, and my mother's an incredible traditional sewer. Like I'm wearing her earrings now, and these are done on traditional moose hide, traditionally tanned moose hide, and these are beads and abalone. So there's that when I wear beadwork or pieces of what I call fashion, but it's actually it's a continuance of culture, is a cultural practice, and then I use it in this contemporary way through performance art or theater or whatever I'm working on. And it's that we never, because we were so nomadic, we never carried, we never had paintings, right? Like we never carried art. Like I'm going to carry my little piece of painting on my back as we go nomadically to follow migration and survival and seasons. But what we did is we wore art on our bodies, and we wore art on our face and our hands and our arms. We wore art on our feet. We decorated our dogs with art. We did all of that. We created toys out of those natural materials for our children to play with, and we decorated our weapons with art, and that creativity has always been within us. And so when we think about contemporary practice, that knowledge that our ancestors carried, we now carry through us, through the same art practice that we do now, which is we wear our art, we speak our art, we live our art, we tell our art, and we share our art with each other. And we wouldn't be able to do that if we didn't understand the importance of our own history and our own now. And I call it a cosmology, in the way that cosmology influences everything that we do. So when I write a play and I start including language into the play that is indigenous, the minute that language becomes part of the world shifts, because the spirit is in the language, and that the language is living. And so when you reawaken language, everything else changes around it. And you have to understand the responsibility of when you bring those into your work. And you're right, if you don't understand the connection to land and animals and space in that really real textual way, then you start losing that connection to art, or how to infuse that culture with art. And so I always find arts and culture they're the same thing to me, and to like arts and culture is absolutely the same. And so I always find it interesting when I meet other people and they're like, well, this is arts and this is culture. And I'm like, no, it's arts and culture. It's always together, and they're always connected. The North, or the Arctic, seems to have a closer relationship to, or a closer understanding of the impacts of climate change. And I think partially why that is that the Inuit have such a close relationship with land and water itself, and so they're very sensitive to when things shift and change, because the reliance on the animals and the water and the hunting is still very much alive in the culture. And so when you get a beluga, you actually, the camp itself is not able to touch the beluga or harvest any parts of it until the scientists come and do tests on the beluga. And I was asking them, what is the purpose of all the tests that you're doing on this whale? And one of the scientists had said, well, I've been doing this for about 5 years, and I'm testing the thickness of the blubber of the beluga. And I said, oh, that's really interesting. And I said, what have you noticed? She said, the population is good. The beluga continues to dive to the depths that it naturally does. The health, everything, the population is good, but the blubber is getting thinner And I asked her, why do you think that the blubber is getting thinner? And she said, it's because the fish that they're eating has less fat than the fish that they normally eat, which means that there's new species of fish that are coming from the south to the north because the water temperature is changing. And the beluga, although still migrating the same areas that it always has new fish to eat, and that fish is not as fatty. And therefore the thickness of the blubber is getting thinner. And that kind of knowledge of climate change, you can see that direct impact at that minute level. And so then what I did is, you'll see a clip of the presentation, is I created a performance art piece called Anticipation, which is like waiting for whale, because as a woman, you don't go in the boat, and so the women wait at the camp waiting for whale, and when you get the whale, you cut it up and you make you hang it to dry. You let the oil collect so that you could use it as a preservative. Like every essence of the whale is utilized still, which is pretty incredible. And so and in that, as I was cutting the whale, the blubber was getting thinner and thinner and thinner until the end. I'm really just hanging the thinnest skin of whale, and that was my interpretation of how the beluga whale is getting impacted by climate change. There is a response from certain people that feel like that beluga whale hunting or seal hunting or any type of hunting itself is actually an action against environment, and that isn't true. As you know, and as many people who know Indigenous peoples and governance and sustainability, is that Indigenous communities understand migration and they understand impact, and that one of the ways to be able to live for the hundreds of thousands of years that Indigenous have is that they have to understand sustainability and respect. And so there's never been an overpopulation or an over harvesting of animals, and that there's a sense of reciprocity, and that when you hunt an animal, it is your responsibility to make sure that every part of that animal is utilized in some capacity, and that is showing the respect for the life and the spirit of that animal. And that's very, very important to know. And you also have to think about that if Indigenous people were no longer able to hunt or to harvest from the land, that they would actually starve, because the price of food in the north is atrocious. And when the vegetables and the meat and all of that food comes north, it's gone through from Mexico to US to Canada to the north. You're not getting fresh produce, you're not getting fresh fruit, you're not getting even fresh meat. And that when you actually connect to the land and the animal, you're sustaining not only one family, but you're sustaining a community. When you look at it like that, that's sustainability, that's health, that's culture, that's language, that's intergeneration, that's future, and that's something that gets passed on to children. And it's very biased to think that is unhealthy, and that's a form of non-environmentalism, because there's a sense of privilege when someone can say that, and it's privilege because they live in an urban center where everything is accessible to them, everything is a reasonable price to them, that there's an income that provides that, instead of looking at it as that hunter that hunts that whale and that seal, that is a wage for that hunter to be able to share that the hide itself with artisans, with and use it from an artistic perspective. And so it just actually really ripples out to create a health and wellness within Indigenous community. And so that's, to me, that is environmentalism. And to me, that is a connectedness to land that allows us to be so responsive to when the climate changes. And I think the globe now, like global populations, are now learning that systemic racism does not sustain systems, and that to be able to grow together and thrive together is that we need to ensure that all spaces include all people and all voices, and that it can't be the same anymore, because the same isn't working. And where Indigenous people fit in that is that, is that knowledge and that awareness of connection to land and connection to teachings that are not capitalist based, and teachings that are not about power, but about how we can all work together and rise together. And that the Black Lives Matter has brought a strong voice of racism that needs to be addressed for all of us to actually be together and work together, that people have to look at themselves, and that COVID is asked all of us to look at ourselves and asked us, what are our value system? And in regards to climate change, I haven't flown anywhere in a year, and I have to say I'm grateful for that, because I've got to spend more time with my family, and I've got to be able to be in one space and appreciate that even more. And that when flying picks up the way that it will, because that's inherently human, is that I won't feel the need to have to jump on that plane to be able to still do the work or have the connections that we're having now. And I think that that's really important. And I know that I'm not the only one that feels that way. And so I hope that we look at the climate as a stronger form of responsibility for the decisions that we make in our personal and professional lives.
Another artist focus on narrating stories about the impact of the climate crisis on the Arctic regions is Montreal-born, New York-based playwright Chantal Bilodeau, artistic director of the Arctic Circle. She shares with us her journey from writing about the climate crisis to launching a global distributed festival that engages playwrights and communities from all over the world. Welcome, Chantal.
Thank you, Andrea, and good morning, everyone from New York, where we, as somebody mentioned earlier, we are thrilled that in 2 hours we'll have a new administration, and we will be rejoining the Paris Agreement. So let me start sharing my screen. Here we go. So I am a playwright and the artistic director of an organization called the Arctic Cycle, which is an organization that uses theater to foster dialogue about our global climate crisis, create an empowering vision of the future, and hopefully inspire people to take action. But the Arctic Cycle came sort of midway through my journey. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit and tell you how I got involved with writing about the climate. As I mentioned, I'm trained as a playwright. And, playwrights tell stories about who we are in the world and who we want to be in the world. And of course, we are in such a huge transition at the moment. The world is in such huge transition that it feels like theater and storytelling is all the more important, because the technical innovations or business innovations or even political changes won't be enough. What we need is to embed sustainability thinking right into our culture. And one of the ways to do that is through the arts. So in 2007, I took a trip to Alaska just as a vacation because I knew somebody who lived, and this was 1 year after Al Gore's first documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, came out. And so climate change was a lot more in the conversation, in the mainstream conversation, than it had been. And being in Alaska, I was confronted with, first of all, people who were already experiencing climate change a lot more than in the rest of the US. And I was able to even witness it myself. So this picture that you see is a picture that I took. The red arrow shows you, so one thing I understood even before going to Alaska was that glaciers retreat, but I was not familiar at that time with the fact that glaciers also deflate. So this line that you see on the picture is the line, you can see where the mountain, the difference of color of the mountain, and that's where the glacier used to be, and it had deflated all that much. And just for scale, I put a circle around a small building on the slope, just to give you an idea of, I can't tell you in how many feet, but how much the glacier had deflated. So after this experience, I decided I got more and more interested in the Arctic in general, and also the fact that the changes were happening so fast up there, and that the rest of both Canada and the US didn't seem to be that aware of it. And I felt, because it's also connected, and also because we have so much responsibility in what's happening up there in relation compared to the people who live there and emit very little greenhouse gases, but yet they bear the burden of the greatest impacts. So I decided, okay, I'm a playwright, maybe I can, write a play about climate change. So a few years later, I went to Baffin Island in the territory of Nunavut in northern Canada. I was born and raised in Canada. It's, I still consider it my country. I wanted to know, and we have a huge Arctic territory, and I wanted to know what was happening there. So I did a bunch of research, went, met people, talked to a lot of people, found out what was happening, learn a lot about different cultures, about colonialism, about aesthetics of telling these stories in the process. And I came back and I wrote a play called Sila, which is now published and has been produced a number of times. And actually Renata, who just talked, was in that play. In the premiere that was produced in Boston. Sila looks at, so two of the things I'm very interested in writing that play was to look at complexity and interconnectedness. And I often describe Sila as interconnectedness across the land. So there were multiple characters, all in a set time, contemporary time. They included an Inuit activist and her grown daughter, a French-Canadian scientist, Coast Guards officers, and polar bears. You can see here the two huge polar bear, and you can see in one of the quadrants the picture also of an underwater goddess, Inuit goddess of the oceans and the underworld. And it was about looking at how all these characters were connected and how their actions affected each other, and whether they could come together or not to address specific problems. And in writing this play, I did a lot of research. I had to teach myself a lot about climate change and the science of it, and the different impacts. And after writing the play, I was just so enamored with all this work and everything I was learning, that I decided, okay, I think I'm going to write another play. There's a lot more than I can fit in this one play. I think I'm going to write another play and explore the same subject. So I had a chance to go to an artist residency, which took place on a boat, on a sailboat, and was around the Svalbard Islands, which sit midway between the mainland of Norway and the North Pole. And it was artists and educators, and we sailed for about 10 days. And I got a sense of the maritime aspect of the Arctic, because when I went to Nunavut, I was my whole trip was on land. And out of this trip, I wrote a second play called Forward, which is also published and has been produced at Kansas State University. And Forward, following with the themes of the first play, which was complexity and interconnectedness, with Forward, I took a different tact, and I looked at interconnectedness, I would say vertically instead of horizontally. And I say vertically because the play takes place over 120 years. And so it looks at interconnectedness across time, across generations. How I was also very interested in how these days we talk a lot about what we're leaving for the next generations. And I was wondering, what did the generations before us think? Like, were they thinking about what they would leave for us? And also I wanted to look at the difference between not the difference, but I wanted to look at the choices that we make, and how often, most of us, few exceptions, one who's leaving the White House today, have the best intentions when we make decisions, and we make decisions based on the knowledge that we have, not knowing what the consequences will be necessarily in the future. And I don't think we can fault anybody for that. The fault lies when we become aware of negative consequences and we don't act to change them. So that play looked at that. And so second play, second country, this was based in Norway. And then I was on a roll, and I decided, okay, I'm going to keep going. And so I decided I'm going to write one play for each country in the Arctic, where the name comes from, the Arctic Cycle. And to date, I have these two plays that you just saw that have been written, and I'm working on a third one, which is set in the US and was scheduled to premiere this past fall, but of course had to be postponed because of COVID-19, but will eventually be produced by a theater company in Anchorage in Alaska. Now, all of this is great, it takes a really long time to write a play. It takes a really long time to develop it, get it produced, and it takes a lot of resources. And of course, time is something we don't have a lot of when we're talking about the climate crisis, if we want to avoid the greatest impacts or greatest disruptions. So eventually, a few years down the road, I started thinking, along with some colleagues, how can we get more playwrights, more people to tell these stories? How can we have more voices? Because, I'm just one person. It's just one very specific perspective, and we need a lot more voices, a lot more different perspectives from all over. And we came up with this project called Climate Change Theater Action. Climate Change Theater Action started in 2015. It happens every other year. We commissioned 50 playwrights from around the world to write a short play, 5 minutes long, about an aspect of climate change based on a prompt. Then we take this collection of 50 plays and we make it available to people, whoever wants to present an event within a certain time window, which is in the fall. Using one or several plays from the collection and adding more materials of their own. And our goal is to help communities have conversations around the climate crisis that are not based in politics or that are not steeped in ideology, that are not a conversation after a scientific lecture. So it's providing an avenue that's very personal, a personal story, and that invites people to bring all of themselves to this conversation, not just their intellect, but also their heart and their feelings, and to be fully engaged with people who have similar values. The project has, it started in 2015. The last time we did it was in 2019. There's another one coming up this year at the end of 2021. Oh, and I forgot to mention one thing. As part of the presentation, we asked the organizers to include an action, which is something that goes beyond just the theatrical experience and either brings people together in a different way or invites them to take a bigger action than they normally would. So this could mean, you know, writing to their representatives to demand policies on climate change. It can mean signing petitions, they have been events where they've collected food, non-perishable food as the price of admission, and then they donated that to food banks. It's the possibilities are really wide, and people have done all kinds of things. Events will take place. The project is meant to be as flexible as possible. So events will take place in theaters, of course, universities and schools, but also outside in parks, street corners. There have been events that have taken place by the foot of a glacier, on kayaks in the water, sometimes in community centers, museums. Some people have adapted the plays into short films or presented readings on podcasts. It's really wide open. To give you an idea of the scope, in 2019, we presented over 200 events in 28 countries. 78 universities participated worldwide, so it's educating a whole new generation of artists. All 50 US states were represented, which it was the first time we achieved this, and it was very difficult because typically there are some states that are not really engaged with that topics, but we managed to get all states participating. 3,000 participants were directly involved. These are the people, these are the actors, the organizers, everybody who had a hand in putting an event together. And we reached 26,000 audience members. And before, I think I'm very close to being at time, but before I go, I want to show you just a few photos from these events to give you a sense of the variety. This was the kickoff event that took place in New York City. We always present the first event of the season. The season is about 3 months long, and this was in 2019. An event in, I believe this was Seoul. Yes, organized by a company called Blooming Lotus. The Wilderness Theater Company in Colorado presented an event outside in a national park. And this was a Native Earth Indigenous Company in Toronto, and a play that lent itself to a lot of movement. Yale University presented one of our climate change plays, short plays, as part of a cabaret that they do every month. And this was at Yale University, at Massey University in New Zealand. So this project is ongoing. My series of plays is ongoing, and I hope my goal was to show you a little bit of a journey to my journey to help maybe other artists get inspired and see that when you really believe in something and you're willing to pursue your ideas, there's always the possibility to make change. Thank you. Thank you, Chantal. I actually, yes, feel very much like through this presentation, we are going through a journey that starts from our intellects
and gradually is reaching our hearts. And in order to dive more in depth at the heart of the traditional wisdom of indigenous communities, we have asked a contribution from Miguel Juan Leon. He's the coordinator of the Center of Indigenous Art in Papantla, Mexico. He's a Totonac translator, interpreter, and pedagogue.
Kathleen, Tlanchitani Tanti.
Hace 15 años, en el Totonacapan sembramos un sueño y todos los días nos despertamos para vivirlo. Somos danzantes, alfareros, bordadoras, voladores, sanadores, campesinos, artesanos, músicos, madres, hijos, abuelos. Y estamos orgullosos de ser totonacas, de habitar la tierra de los tres corazones, de comunicarnos en nuestra lengua, de respetar la naturaleza, de tener 3 patrimonios reconocidos por la UNESCO. La ciudad sagrada de El Tajín, que es la morada de nuestros ancestros. La ceremonia ritual de voladores, que es nuestro diálogo con los dioses. El centro de las artes indígenas, que es nuestro saber enseñar y saber aprender. Cada primavera, cientos de miles de creadores y visitantes del mundo conocen nuestra cultura durante el festival Cumbre Tajín. Todo el año, el Parque Taquilsucut nos recibe para confirmar nuestra identidad y preservar nuestras tradiciones. Hacemos libros, videos, teatro, textiles, música, poesía, acrobacia, ceremonias. Regeneramos nuestra cultura. Hoy, deseamos que nuestros logros nos permitan caminar por otros sueños. Queremos dar forma física a un complejo cultural único en América, que incluya la ciudad sagrada de El Tajín, el Parque Taquilsucut, nuestra palabra y la voz de quienes creen en nuestra cultura como motor del desarrollo social, económico, educativo y pacífico. Queremos que nuestro modelo de regeneración cultural sea replicado para salvar la historia y la cultura de otros hermanos indígenas. Queremos que en nuestra tierra broten los alimentos y se mantengan nuestros rituales. Queremos que se unan las manos de los gobiernos, los ciudadanos, los abuelos, las instituciones y los gestores en una sola siembra cultural. Queremos que sueñen con nosotros para confirmar que a través de la cultura podemos generar una vida digna, empleo, salud, educación, turismo, concordia, identidad, arraigo, diálogo. Aquí, en el Totonacapan, durante los últimos 15 años, hemos confirmado que soñar construye realidades. Los invitamos a soñar con una nueva política de atención a los indígenas y con apoyos económicos para proyectos sustentables. Sobre todo, los invitamos a soñar con un complejo cultural que reciba a miles de visitantes todo el año, ponga en valor nuestro patrimonio y confirme que el modelo Tajín es un logro de México para el mundo.
Los saludo desde mi lengua totonaca. Mi nombre es Miguel Juan León. Les hablo desde la comunidad totonaca que se ubica en la región del Totonacapan, norte del estado de Veracruz, México. Quiero compartirles nuestra experiencia como comunidad totonaca. Hace aproximadamente 20 años, la comunidad totonaca empieza a desarrollar una serie de actividades culturales para poder regenerar la cultura en general, o poder transmitir la sabiduría totonaca hacia la nueva generación. La comunidad totonaca empieza a valorar más sobre el patrimonio cultural totonaca, empieza a conocer más sobre la importancia de la zona arqueológica El Tajín, A partir de este proceso de regeneración cultural y de este festival Cumbre Tajín, la comunidad totonaca empieza a generar procesos organizativas, háblese de las danzas, háblese de la medicina tradicional, háblese de los consejos de abuelos, nuestras autoridades tradicionales que justamente orientan todo el proceso de regeneración de la cultura totonaca. A partir de este detonante cultural, se empezó a reflexionar sobre la importancia de crear una escuela propia, una escuela totonaca, denominado desde la lengua totonaca Xtasxaquet Maxcaxtlahuaná, Centro de las Artes Indígenas. Esta escuela cuenta con un modelo propio y cuenta con casas escuelas de la tradición, es decir, espacios donde se enseña el arte totonaca, espacios donde se transmite el arte totonaca, donde se reflexiona la importancia de lo que es el arte, la importancia del patrimonio cultural totonaca, de la importancia de la lengua propiamente. Dentro de la filosofía totonaca, la cultura se visualiza como un árbol donde las raíces conforman o constituyen todo el bagaje cultural. Ahí están los conocimientos. Y el tronco, pues ahí están los abuelos y las abuelas, ¿no? Y en las ramas del árbol, pues están todas las disciplinas del arte totonaca. Es decir, que la Escuela del Centro de las Artes Indígenas es un espacio de enseñanza del arte totonaca, es un espacio donde se asegura la existencia de un pueblo. La visión es que dentro de 50 o dentro de 45 años, un niño que está aprendiendo va a ser el abuelo que va a estar en el Cantillán. Cantillán es el espacio grande, es el espacio sagrado, es la casa grande, donde uno encuentra el mensaje del abuelo, el mensaje de la abuela, ¿no? Y se trata de generar procesos que puedan apostarle a una filosofía de vida para los mayores, para los abuelos, para las abuelas. Esta filosofía de vida se desglosa en el clan Latamat. El clan Latamat quiere decir el buen vivir, lo que le llamaríamos en otros términos el desarrollo integral, desarrollo desde la educación, desde desarrollo espiritual, desarrollo cósmico. Miramos al clan Latamat como un propósito de vida. Nos demanda disciplina, nos demanda responsabilidad con la naturaleza, nos demanda un desarrollo espiritual, personal, colectivo, comunitario y como humanidad, ¿no? Nos demanda a encontrar espacios de reflexión, nos demanda a conocer el arte como un medio para desarrollar nuestro sentido espiritual, como un medio para desarrollar nuestro sentido natural de vida y poder contestar esas preguntas básicas: ¿qué es para mí la vida? ¿Para qué tengo la vida? ¿Cuál es mi misión en esta vida? ¿Qué es lo que debo de hacer en esta vida? ¿Y cómo voy a vivir la vida? Es decir, que si nosotros desde la comunidad totonaca analizamos qué es el arte, de inmediato no podemos solamente quedarnos con la idea de un solo concepto del arte. Más bien, el arte tiene mucho que ver con la parte ceremonial, la parte ritual, la parte profunda de lo que es la vida. Encontramos esta conexión divina con la naturaleza. Encierra todo un conocimiento que se ha transmitido de generación en generación y que nuestro papel como la nueva generación, poder absorberla y poder compartirla al mundo. El festival ofrece, si bien un programa cultural, pero también ofrece un mercado cultural. El derrame económico que se genera durante el festival deja un referente importante durante el año en términos de empleos, en términos de generar recursos, en términos de generar procesos en temas de servicios hoteleras, en temas de servicio de transporte, en temas también de diferentes ventas que se pueden generar a partir de esta plataforma cultural. Se generó todo un proceso de organización comunitaria. Sabemos la existencia de los pozos petroleros en nuestra región, sabemos que ha generado, por un lado, empleo, pero también ha generado daños irreversibles. Tenemos agrupaciones que están en defensa del agua, en defensa del elemento sagrado. Hablar de la ritualidad del Totonacapan es hablar también de estos retos que existen, es hablar también de que tenemos que cuidar más nuestros ríos, porque desde la filosofía totonaca, los ríos pues son las venas de nuestra madre tierra. Hoy por hoy, a partir de estas actividades que se desarrollan en el Tajín, vemos el nuevo rostro indígena totonaco, contemporáneo, moderno, pero consciente de su identidad. La comunidad totonaca no se visualiza aislado, más bien se visualiza como un elemento importante de la modernidad, ¿no? De la vida actual. Cuando hablamos esta suma de voces, esta suma de sabiduría, suma de energía, nos estamos basando de la filosofía que nos da la Madre Tierra. Hablamos de esta gran diversidad porque en la naturaleza nos enseña la diversidad. La Madre Tierra es nuestra casa en común como pueblos y como humanidad. Ahí están nuestras venas, ahí está, como dicen los abuelos, ahí está nuestro ombligo como humanidad. Así como las Naciones Unidas dibuja los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, nosotros con los abuelos y con las abuelas hacemos este análisis de la Agenda 2030, de estas 17 objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. Los abuelos de inmediato dicen, bueno, eso es el Clan Latamat, ¿no? Los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible es el Clan Latamat desde la visión totonaca, es decir, es un modelo de vida. El Centro de las Artes Indígenas cumple un papel importante para poder lograr o alcanzar este modelo de vida denominado Clan Latamat.
And now, as a conclusion of this rich sum of experiences, let's hear the passionate message of the director of Earth Saver Dream Ensemble, UNESCO Artist for Peace, founder of the Philippine Educational Theater Association and president of the Philippines ITI, Cecile Guidote Alvarez from Manila, Philippines. She's a survivor and a fighter for justice and equality through the arts.
The Philippines was hit by the most powerful typhoon, which killed 8,000 people. The indescribable misery and suffering because of lives lost, destruction of livelihood, homes, infrastructure, heritage, environmental degradation, disabilities, and hunger in 2013 was witnessed by the world. Nothing has changed. We are still visited by a minimum of 20 intensifying typhoons, and the last 4 typhoons whiplashed our country in a matter of 3 weeks. We also lament the recurrence of the devastation wrought all over the continents. Not even developed countries are spared from super droughts, super floods, raging forest fires, heat waves, snowstorms. The oceans are rising, and so many islanders have to become refugees in other places. The United Nations has called for emergency action. The Paris Accord has been signed. There are still naysayers, but higher ambition action is now demanded. We must not breach 1.5 degrees centigrade or Armageddon will happen. I am Cecile Guidote Alvarez, Director of the Earth Savers, that has been honored by UNESCO as Artists for Peace for our inclusive, interdisciplinary, intercultural, interfaith techno-art strategy that has been recognized as the 6th in the world as a dream center for development, rehabilitation, and environmental education through arts and media. It was created by my husband, Hierson Alvarez, when we returned from exile, and he served as senator because he said that he could do the best laws, but unless it is understood and actualized by the people in all our communities, we would face disaster. He said, and I quote, "We must defuse the ecological time bomb of global warming today to save tomorrow. Every medium must be used for education. A crusade, the moral equivalent of war in confronting climate change, must be waged effectively and swiftly. What it takes to save the earth is a change in attitude, lifestyle, consumption, habits of thinking, and way of viewing creation. We must pool efforts and resources together for sustainable development, nothing short of a social movement, a collective undertaking to ensure the very survival of mankind and life in the galaxy." What did we do? Small island states, archipelagic states like the Philippines, are even more vulnerable. It is imperative to mitigate non-essential luxury and inefficient carbon consumption geared towards a low-carbon green growth economy that will sustain human well-being, health, and food security. Earthsavers joined the Senate Committee on Environment in a call for a leaders' climate conference where UNESCO scientists with the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change and Climate Change Institute scientists were invited to present the situation to mayors of cities and towns in coastal areas. They were brought to the cabinet meeting and an interagency climate committee was formed, a study of how Asia Pacific islands would be inundated. Thus, a Manila Declaration was held. We even had media contests, from cartoons, editorial cartoons, to broadcast and stories, as well as paintings, held nationwide and brought to Berlin at the first conference of the parties. The mission of twinning protection of cultural diversity, particularly indigenous peoples' heritage, with safeguarding biodiversity, together with efforts of rehabilitating damaged ecosystems, can be communicated through an interdisciplinary, cross-cutting, integrated arts and media approach. We had to link the young to indigenous people's wisdom of living in harmony with nature. We invited the United Nations Indigenous Peoples Ambassador Rigoberta Menchú to speak in Congress. More than 4,000 scientists have been gathered by the United Nations to explain the scientific data and the response that we must do to this crisis. But up to now, we have not fully confronted the issue. There is a response. If only we do it collectively, we can overcome. We have to popularize science in cultural terms people can understand. We have to inform and motivate them about the problem and the solutions. What are they? Reducing carbon footprints, innovate eco-friendly products, increasing efficiency and widening use of renewable energy, mass transportation, organic farming, green building systems with urban planning and health benefits through relevant but affordable technology, while showing the possibilities for funding via the credit markets, programs of coastal resources, river basin management for disaster risk reduction, poverty alleviation linked to climate change adaptation, such as reforestation, environmental education, garbage recycling and composting, and energy conservation. These were the themes we used in a hexamedia approach to crystallize through all the different art disciplines, sustaining an award-winning television and radio comics program to outreach the masses. There were conferences and workshops, and now the use of social media platforms, particularly during this pandemic, is critical. We did soap opera on radio, which has been highlighted by CNN as an international soap opera for social change. We have created songs about garbage recycling and composting, and it was done as a rap song by the most popular singer in the country. We speak of the agony, death, and resurrection of the forests and the seas, the lament of the oceans, expressed through dance theater, involving the integrated performance of persons with disabilities, together with indigenous and out-of-school youth, presenting social cohesion on the stage, and it reaches the hearts and minds much more readily. We have even created sail paintings about the Sustainable Development Goals, the care of the ocean, attached to sailboats. We have also done the climate strike together with the world. We had held contests on text poetry, competition of cartoons, and photographs on biodiversity, as well as paintings by children about post-COVID imagining of a world. We must stop poverty. We have to care for creation, as succinctly clarified in the encyclical of Pope Francis. But all faiths engender this idea, touching hearts and minds. This is why we must build a creative army of artists, communicators, educators, scientists, bonded together to stop violence against mankind and Mother Earth. It is important for governments to recognize that development is retarded or accelerated, depending on the relevant dynamic use of culture. We must use the arts as a mirror to see our foibles and seize our strengths to forge our identity. We must use it as an armor against our social ills. We must use it as a memory bank. We cannot forget, we cannot have amnesia about the suffering of our people. The failure in governance can be traced to the failure in effective cultural communications. We must re-echo and reverberate the cries of orphans and widows, their agony. We must provide hope and show the pathway of collective action to underscore our common humanity, solidarity, not by force of arms, but by the power of the arts and media. We must care for our traditions. We must conscientize and unfold the root causes of this evil, this indifference about the state of the environment. Greed, selfishness, corruption must be cast away and substituted with caring, compassion, and sharing. We must empathize when people are suffering and rejoice in the good events that happen. We must all participate. I'm sure this webinar will be a great awakening to encourage every country to harness and mobilize their cultural resources and heritage, and encourage ancestral roots to new artistic routes of expression to build a better, peaceful, just, healthy, safe, clean environment, the womb to furnish and nourish life. This is a human right. Thank you. Salamat. Mabuhay.
Thank you, everyone, for all your precious contributions. Thank you also for the listeners in Zoom and in YouTube. Now I invite all the panelists to turn on their cameras and to gather in these last minutes that are remaining and try to have a more open conversation and maybe address some questions that the audience online may have. So I see that some are already turning on the cameras. Thank you, everyone, because you are in completely different time zones. So I know that for some of you it's very early, and for some of us, like here in Korea, it's already 1:30 a.m. And I see also Miguel and Andrea and Renelta. Thank you, everybody. I feel that actually through this, and Cecile, Etienne, and Vinita, thank you. I feel for me, I must say that this experience of preparing this webinar, I realized that in some way, it actually has changed me very much, because I had the opportunity to speak with you, some of you personally, some of you interviewed, some of you I tried to research and read what you have written or what you have published on videos. And I've learned so much. When I started this webinar, I had a lot of questions. How can my practice as an artist be really effective, and what I can do and how I can feel and make a contribution? And definitely I must say that I don't have an answer now, but certainly my life is in a transformation now. So I hope that this will lead me to some very positive conclusions. And I'm very happy that we had these shared experiences. So I would like to ask some of you recorded videos and some of you spoke directly. I would like you to ask you before I bring any question, if you have anything that you would like to add or any comment about your experience also of listening to the other contributions. Anyone who wants?
Maybe, Andrea, I can add only one thing, that I think this experience is, of course, very important, and maybe it's part of what the researcher, the Korean researcher Hoong Gru-yu, say as the way to talk about this project problems. She used the term ecopedagogy, and she said we have to learn about nature, learn in nature, and learn from nature. So I think this talk is not only talk, but in a kind of way it's a new sort of education and way to educate people about sustainability and ecological problems. But I think it will be very important in the future to try to create new experiences to stimulate people to a new connection with nature, in the nature.
Thank you.
Hi. Yeah.
Hello, Cecile. Cecile. Hello.
Yeah. I wanted to say it was wonderful to connect with, in a sense, soulmates in this effort. And we'd like to invite them because we are hopeful that the world will be better by October, and we are having an Sustainable Development Goals Resilient Art Festival Forum and workshops precisely in order to push the concept of caring for people and planet and promoting peace and prosperity and through partnerships. So maybe through the Seoul Institute or La Mama and well, the coordinators, if you're interested, we can host people as long as they come to Manila, or we can do it also by blended approach to further consolidate and really build an international or global movement which will mobilize all artists and government to be supporting the importance of the cultural dimension in environment. So that's in October, and I hope this is a pathway towards going to Manila or joining us even by Zoom.
Thank you for the invitation, which of course I guess is extended to all the present people here. We would love to give continuity to these connections that we are starting to establish.
Mm-hmm.
If I may, a bit.
Please.
Yeah, I think, well, thank you for putting this up together. This is a very hard work for having the different time zones and all. But I think it's a good opportunity because this year, since last year actually, has become our turning point and an opportunity for us to redefine our lifestyles and our futures. So this is our chance to restart how we would like to live, and we have the choices. So I think this is a good start to see it from the art, design, and culture viewpoints, because there are lots of knowledge that we still have to dig and we can learn from. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very impressed, especially from the diversity of the point of views and the voices that you all have expressed, starting from Etienne's a really interesting point of shifting the focus of our perception of the experiences that we have with the climate crisis to a more connection to the earth through the message of Miguel and of course the passionate invitation by Cecile. So this is very impressive, because even though there are such diversity in the approach, somehow things are resonating as if it is one voice. I don't want to sound too naive, but that's how I'm perceiving these different approaches. We see that among the attendees online, some people have asked us to share bibliographies. So live, I ask you if you want to share with me some of your references. Some of them were already mentioned, some maybe you haven't, but if you like to share with me some bibliography and references, both of your work and works that you have quoted or that you think they're relevant, please send them so that I can then share it with the participants and attendees.
Sto andando. Ciao.
Anyone else would like to add something more? So I'm going to try to ask you one question. This is like the closing question. I appreciate that you have stayed for so long. So my closing question is, what is your perception of the next 30 years? What do you see happening? If you can summarize it in a short answer. Shall we start from Etienne?
Okay. I guess it was a pleasure to see such a diversity of amazing practices, and thank you all for sharing this. I think one idea that is really meaningful to me that I think is threaded through a number of the presentations that we've seen is a recognition that we all in this conversation, we here in these little boxes today are ancestors to people who will come after us. People will look back at us and say that we were their ancestors. And I think that if the next 30 years can make that concept of responsibility across generations consequent, rediscover and reconnect to traditions, particularly the incredibly powerful and inspiring traditions of indigenous people, especially in North and South America, but also from a variety of traditions around the world, to connect to a concept that our actions are the action. We are ancestors to those who come after us, and understand our responsibility in that direction. And take that responsibility seriously. The incredible writer, James Baldwin, says responsibility cannot be given up. It can only be abdicated. You can never get rid of your responsibility. You can only abdicate responsibility. And so to actually inhabit, to take on the responsibility of being ancestors to those who will be after us in 30 years and 50 years and 100 years, and what do we owe to them as their ancestors. I think if those threads can be woven together and connected into stronger bonds and greater forms of solidarity, both with humans and with the non-human world, we might have a chance that we could leave things not in such a mess as we have inherited it.
Thank you. Denelta?
Ublami, Tira Titu Renelta Arluk. I come to you from Treaty 7 territory here in Banff, Alberta, Canada. Indigenous peoples of the Stoney Nakoda, the Blackfoot, the Tsuut'ina of the Dene, and Métis Region 3. I'm really grateful to be here in this beautiful land, surrounded by mountains, which is very different than the land that I come from, which is Canadian Shield. So really granite rock, deep rock, and a lot of water, and in just endless sky. When I think about where we are going and what I would like to see in 30 years, or what I imagine, I have a 4-year-old son, Carver, and he's very vibrant and very alive, and very curious about the world, and is very comfortable in all the weather. And I was really grateful for that, because you know, some kids are sensitive to weather, and that fearlessness that he has. And so I guess what I think about is how can I encourage him to continue the fearlessness in the world that's changing around him? Because I do see changes happening within 30 years. I do feel like there's a realism to climate change that is you know, happening and will happen. And so how do we prepare our next generations to adapt, be fearless, and stay curious in the times that are coming, and give them the tools to be able to have that adaptability. So I look at it from that perspective, but also that I've never cherished water more, and
I have created a little altar of where I just have a cup of water, and I just think about that water, and I think about the health and the wellness of water. That is something that's become more and more prevalent into my life. And so I just been thinking about being grateful for those things, for the things that are keeping us alive and healthy, and thinking about how to create that adaptability for future. So just really grateful. Masicho Kuyani.
Thank you. Miguel, ¿todo bien? Disculpa que la lengua que utilizamos es el inglés, sobre todo, aún. ¿Quieres compartir algo o intentar de contestar esta pregunta en cómo ves que las cosas qué cosa puede suceder en 30 años?
Claro, muchas gracias primeramente por la oportunidad de conocerlos, escucharlos. Me han gustado mucho las diferentes prácticas que hoy nos han compartido cada uno de los panelistas. Los saludo desde el corazón. Cuando tratamos de contestar estas preguntas con los mayores, con los abuelos y con las mayoras, siempre nos dicen que nos tenemos que preparar, ¿no? Nos tenemos que formar desde una filosofía, en este caso totonaca, y ver el mundo que nosotros queremos para dentro de 52 años, que ellos lo ven dentro de 52 años. Y dentro de esos 52 años visualizamos un Catuxahuatl, ¿no? El Catuxahuatl es un término en totonaco que refiere la naturaleza, que refiere el medio ambiente, pero que refiere a nuestra madre tierra, ¿no? Tratamos de imaginarnos nuestra madre tierra dentro de 52 años, ¿no? Y ahí trazamos los compromisos que tenemos que tener bien claro, y son compromisos generacionales, es decir, los compromisos de mis hijos, los compromisos de los hijos de mis hijos, y así, ¿no? Es un compromiso a largo plazo, ¿no? Es parte de nuestra vocación de vida.
Déjame traducir. What Miguel is saying is that in the conversation with the elders that are a very important part of their community, they talk about the future and what will happen in 52 years. That's a amount of time that they use to project towards the future. And when they even envision what will happen in 52 years, and they envision nature. He uses the Totonac word that I am not able to repeat. So, but they envision Mother Earth, and they develop a promise. They express a promise, and a promise in long terms, not only for themselves as individuals, but for their children and for their grandchildren. So they think as individuals in this perspective, long-term perspective, and try to make a promise towards the vision that they want of the world and the earth in 52 years. Gracias. Cecile, or
yeah,
something?
You know, I'm surely gonna be dead already in 30 years. And what I am absolutely worried about is for all the children in the world, because if we don't listen to science, they all said that we only have 10 years. We were supposed to agree to actualize the Paris Accord by 2030. We have 10 years to do it, to act in an emergency mode so that we can stop the irreversible stage. If we don't act within this decade that is left to us, we will surely, even if we're dead, be lamenting the loss and this total destruction of Mother Earth. I mean, and people will just vanish, not just the atomic bomb, it's climate change which will vanquish everybody. So if we don't act now, that is the issue. How to mobilize, to harness, to push, motivate people to act now. Governments and everyone's responsibility. There is an indigenous teaching that you have to respect the seventh generation. You don't do anything that will harm children, the youth, up to the seventh generation. And you respect your ancestors way back to the seventh generation. So therefore, we will not harm the earth, but our actions now, unless we change our way of living, our attitudes, and get together, in 30 years, they really said, the scientists said, we are going to have the total disruption. We either act now to prevent it or suffer that fate. And it's sad because you can only think of your children and grandchildren, and that's the problem. So act now, please. And artists must be the conscientizing force throughout the world.
Thank you. Chantal, would you like to add?
Yes, I think my response would be different depending on which day you ask me, but today I would say I see a rise in grassroots movements, in people wanting to reclaim the systems that haven't worked for most of us and to make them work for more people. I don't know that I have a vision of how much can be accomplished, you know, how successful we can be. There are a lot of variants, but I see a desire more and more to push against systems that are harming us, that are harming the planet, that are harming other beings, and a tiredness of waiting for the people in power to make the changes. You know, we've just, I think around the world, people have had enough of that and are more and more willing to take the matters in their own hand and to effect change on a local level, trying to bring that to a global level, despite the forces that are trying to block these changes. And I would say congratulations for putting this webinar together with so much diversity. It's been really inspiring.
Thank you. Thank you. And as a conclusion from Vinita, if you'd like to add something.
Yeah, well, 30 years is a long way to go. And by 2050, my son would be 50, even older than me. So what I could think about is just, we should invest our time, our energy, our knowledge to the young people like my son, to the next generation, and how they would cope with the current challenges, because now we're already giving them hard times. And another thing is, other than the word balance, what comes to mind is the word priorities. So we should now really choose what is really important for us to continue living and to continue living together. So looking in the social media and so on, you see why people are so messed up, and it's all about perception. It's all about how they think they are and how they perceive life in the future. So why bother about petty things, I'd say, when you don't, or when you can actually think about more pleasant things and so on. So yeah, maybe I hope that everything's all right for us all. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you. Thank you. As a conclusion, my mind goes to something that I observed actually in the last semester more than before teaching here at Seoul Institute of the Arts. I've seen a growing fragility among the students. And I've noticed through different readings and articles that have appeared in different newspapers and so on, that this is not just a case isolated here in Korea. I was reading about an article in the Italian newspaper where there had been a rising number of youngsters, suicide of youngster people. And so I questioned myself as an educator, what am I really teaching to my students? What does it matter whether they are perfect in a certain discipline, or they have they make a perfect movement, or they make a perfect speech on a theater performance, when as educators we are not able to transmit the importance and the value of life. I mean, certainly, again, this is a simplistic thought, because life is complex and the mind of people is very complex. But I was kind of scared to see how quickly a larger number of young people felt unsafe and felt emotionally fragile. And so I'm really, on the contrary, being with you, spending time with you, and hearing your voices is certainly empowering. And some of the messages that we have received through this Q&A is witnessing also that is perceived by others listeners. So I really thank you, and I thank you for your work that you all are doing. And I will, thanks to this opportunity, I thank that we have met, and I really hope that there will be soon future opportunities for more of these kind of exchanges. And an invitation, I repeat the invitation for everyone to join on January 30th for the opening of this initiative, Weather 2020. So I thank all the organizations that have helped in making this happen, and the staff here with me in the room that has managed to navigate this technical environment. So thank you all. It was wonderful. And thank you to all the people that stay with us until 1:58 at night, Korea time.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
day.
Thank you, Andrea.
Morning.
Thank you to your staff and to your partners.
Thank you. Have a good evening.